Hey, it's the Midnight Raven, and today we are looking at the case called Into the Thin Air, and this is part 2 in the case. If you haven't seen the original part, I will link it in the description or up here. This is the case of two young teenagers, aged 19-year-old, that decided they were going to go perform a tradition called Kimodanshi, and it was a tradition of showing courage and fearlessness, and these teenagers literally disappeared into thin air. So this is part 2, and we're going to give you some more details into this case that still remains unsolved to this day. So, a recap. These two teenagers went missing after they were going to a spa hotel, which was a derelict building. The building had gone into bankruptcy and was now being left in disrepair. These two teenagers decided that this was the perfect place to try the Kimodanshi tradition, where you go to a haunted, disused building to show your courage. And this is the story so far. So, speculation would start that the two teenagers had never arrived at the spa they were going to perform this tradition. Was it possible that the teenagers had crashed into deep water? There was a bay nearby and a river. Two more searches would be performed at the nearby hotel where they were meant to have been, and they would find no evidence still that the two girls had even arrived at the hotel. So, another theory was that the teens had fell prey to a local biker gang. This biker gang was known to the area and had been seen hanging out at the hotel as a kind of little hangout place many moons before the teenagers went missing. They were seen hanging out there, smoking, drinking, and just using it as a hangout place. So, in March 2020, police discovered a black Subaru in a nearby harbour. This was similar to the car that the girls had been seen going to when they went to the hotel, and they were seen at a petrol station filling up before texting their friends at 11 p.m. that they had arrived. The question is, from what we can tell, they never arrived at the hotel. So, the car was pulled from the harbour, and unfortunately, in the passenger seats of the black Subaru was the skeletal remains of, at that time, unidentified human remains. At that point, it wasn't clear whether it was the two girls or whether this was a different car, and that more had to be looked at in this investigation. So, the remains were eventually identified using DNA, and it would identify that the remains were of the two teenagers, Megumi and Yashaki. Hopefully, I'm pronouncing that right. So, after 24 years, the two teenagers had been found. Although they had been found dead, their families were happy they knew what had happened. Had the teenagers been in the water for long, at that point it couldn't really be determined. The decomposition of the body made it also hard to establish how long they'd been in the water and the cause of how they died. So, it was revealed in 2014, many years before the car had been found, 6 years in total, that 3 witnesses had come to police stating that they had seen a black Subaru near the harbour the same day the teens had gone missing, and when the car was approached by one of the witnesses, it drove backwards into the harbour, disappearing underneath the water. Questions arose on why it took the police 6 years to then pull the car out of the river. Questions that at this point were unanswered. The witnesses claimed they approached the car and that the car had reversed into the water. At that time of it being reported, they feared they would be in trouble because they were at that time responsible, if you want to call it like that, for the car reversing as they approached it. The identity of the witnesses were never released to the public and were never released to the parents. The car had been in the water for a supposed 6 years before being pulled out, even though the reports from the witnesses had been in 2014. Why the witnesses didn't try to get the car pulled out sooner, why they didn't approach the teenagers' parents, many of these questions remain unanswered, and without knowing who the witnesses are, you cannot really pose these questions to anybody. So the car was pulled out, and obviously the remains of the two teenagers were found. Unfortunately, they were dead, but with still no reason for why the two teenagers were killed and their causes of death or who caused their deaths. These questions are still unanswered today. So the parents of the teens demanded to know who the witnesses are, claiming that the witnesses had come forward again after 2014 and retold the police about the thing that they had seen. Maybe, just maybe, this case would have been solved a lot sooner. It wouldn't have saved their teenagers' lives after they went into the water, but it may have given more evidence for them to go on to find who actually did the driving of the car into the water and maybe give more answers. So, the police had no evidence and no leads at this point because of the car being in the water so long. No evidence was found in the car apart from the skeletal remains. No other information could be found, and obviously, with the witnesses being technically invisible and not being contactable by the parents, little was known more than the witnesses had reported the car being driven into the water. So why had the car reversed into the water? Who had driven the car into the water? Why were these two teenagers targeted? Why were they killed? All these questions remain unanswered. So the police obviously we're trying to keep information close to their chest, and that is what you do in some cases. You don't give out too much information because it contains a case. Would the parents of the dead teenagers gone to accuse these witnesses of not helping? Would they have badgered them? Who knows? But the police investigation provided the family with little to no answers of who the person drove the car, why their teens had to die, and why they were targeted. So, questions that remain unanswered are obviously why had someone reversed the car into the water? Who was the person that killed the teens? Why did it take 6 years for the police to pull the car after they were told in 2014 of the car being driven into the water? Why didn't the witnesses come forward after 2014 to the police again and say, why has the car still laying in the river? Why did the witnesses not go to the parents and say, look, we believe this is the car. We don't know if your teens are in the car or what happened, but we have information that might pose interesting in this case. A lot of this case seems to be, as you would call it, murky. The witnesses, the police, the little to no help from the police in this case. So, like I said, why did the police take so long to remove the car? We may never know. Who killed these two young teenagers? Why were they driven into the river? Who drove them into the river? And what was their motive is still unknown to this day. The belated report would show a misplace of evidence. Maybe the reports were never filed properly by the police and it took them 6 years. I don't know. There's no evidence to suggest foul play by police, but it is 6 years later on that they were obviously, the skeletal remains were found. Evidence could have been damaged in that time, hence due to water damage. It is harder to get evidence once it has been submerged for so long. So unfortunately, this case still remains unsolved. The two teenagers Megumi and Yoshaki obviously lost their lives for whatever reason, and unfortunately the case seems to be at a halt with no evidence of who the driver was and no evidence from the witnesses to help. Little information is known to this day of the cause of why they had to die and the reasons behind it. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. This was part 2 of the case called Into the Thin Air. I hope you enjoyed this. If you want to support the channel in a way, remember, become a member for behind the scenes videos. Give it a thumbs up. It's free. If you want to support the channel financially for all my research and time and effort, PayPal or a super chat would be amazing. And if you want to follow me on Instagram, I am the Midnight Raven there too. Join me for another true crime case with Raven very, very soon. And I will see you very soon for another video. Take care and thanks for watching. Bye guys.